government agents of suppression, or extraterrestrial visitors in disguise? Who are the men in black, and could recent CCTV footage finally provide proof of their existence? This week on Night of Horror, we pull back the veil on these highly mysterious individuals. Back in 1968, when the Condon Committee was sampling public attitudes towards UFOs, they gave the following statement to a cross-section of the American public. A government agency maintains a top-secret file UFO reports. The respondents were then asked to answer true or false. A substantial majority, almost 2/3 of all people surveyed, agreed with this assertion. Amongst teenagers, the gap was even wider, with almost 75% of them believing the statement to be true. If that same survey was carried out today, it is believed would be even higher. This is hardly surprising, considering that we now live in an age of free-flowing information or misinformation, depending on who you ask. And especially since the advent of the internet, it has become almost a normality to question and make accusations against those in power. But little over half a century ago, this lack of trust in government was nowhere near as prevalent as it is today. And one could argue that it all started back in the late 1940s, in the wake of what is now known as the Roswell incident. That one event, whether or not there is any truth to it, brought into the mainstream the very notion of government conspiracies and cover up. Throughout the 1950s, when the concept of flying saucers and visitors from outer space was still in its infancy, UFO witnesses and investigators were apparently being harassed, threatened, and ordered into maintaining silence by mysterious individuals known as the Men in Black. These strange men were often described as wearing black suits with dark hats, and that they traveled around in black cars, usually of the classic American variety. At the time, it was believed that these individuals were a secret government organization tasked with suppressing any mention of UFOs or extraterrestrials within the public domain. But over the years, this assumption has evolved, and advocates of their existence now consider the possibility that these supposed government agents themselves might, in fact, be extraterrestrial in nature. The 1997 film of the same name made light of the MIB conspiracy, and did so to disarming comic effect. But for the people who have apparently been visited by these mysterious entities, it is no laughing matter, and what follows is but a small selection of accounts regarding such encounters. In 1952, a former USA Air Force serviceman turned an amateur ufologist by the name of Albert K. Bender set up an organization called the International Flying Saucers Bureau to investigate and report upon strange UFO activity being witnessed all over the world. At that time, the organization was initially a success, publishing a weekly newsletter which was distributed to its small but dedicated audience of around 2,000 people worldwide. However, in early 1953, Bender suddenly and mysteriously shut down his operation and ceased all publication, leaving in the newsletter's final issue a rather ominous message. We advise those engaged in social work to please be very cautious. Colleagues reported his odd demeanor at the time, stating that he seemed agitated and nervous, as if someone or something had scared him out of his wits. Bender did not eat or sleep properly for weeks after he closed the bureau. During this time, when questioned about his sudden and inexplicable decision, he refused to elaborate and maintained this silence for many years. Afterwards, almost a decade later, in 1962, Bender finally explained his actions, saying that he had been visited by 3 men dressed in black who had appeared out of thin air and warned him not to continue his work on UFOs. Some years later, in 1976, a well-known and highly respected family physician, Dr. Herbert Hopkins, was to report a very chilling encounter. Hopkins was home alone at his residence in Old Orchard Beach, Maine on the night of September 11th. He was studying a UFO incident which had occurred some months prior, when the phone suddenly rang. Hopkins answered, and a man's voice was heard on the other end, identifying himself as a representative of the New Jersey UFO organization, something which later turned out to be bogus. The caller asked Hopkins if he was alone and whether he could visit to talk about the UFO case he was investigating. Hopkins agreed, and the man told him that he would be there shortly. The moment he hung up, Hopkins went to the front door to turn on his porch light and noticed that the man was already coming steps in front of his house. He recalled feeling a little unnerved by this because there was no way he could have reached the front door in the time. Over to the light switch, and bear in mind that this was before the advent of mobile phones. Nevertheless, he was still keen to hear what this man had to say, and upon inviting him in, Hopkins was struck by the stranger's appearance. He was a tall, skinny man who wore a dark, ill-fitting suit and had a black derby on his head. His skin was smooth and deathly pale, and when he sat down and removed his hat, Hopkins noticed that he was as bald as an egg. He had no hair whatsoever. He was devoid of eyebrows and eyelashes. His lips were a bright ruby red, and he spoke in an expressionless voice. There was no intonation or inflection in his tone, and all of his words were evenly spaced. Throughout their conversation, he sat motionless, his mouth being the only thing that moved. As if that wasn't disturbing enough, on one of the few occasions that the stranger did another part of his body besides his lips, he happened to wipe his mouth with the back of his hand, which left a red smear across his cheeks. It was at this point that Hopkins realized the stranger was wearing lipstick, and then further noticed that his mouth was actually a perfectly straight slit. He didn't even have a pair of lips. Hopkins became very frightened at this point, and though was sat in his pocket, he complied immediately. How this strange man even knew that he had a copper coin in his pocket is a mystery, but throughout the conversation, the doctor had the distinct feeling that the visitor was somehow reading his mind. Hopkins held the coin in the palm of his hand as instructed, and the visitor simply told him to watch it. As he did, it changed color from copper to silver, then became blurry, almost as if it was going out of focus. It then disappeared right in front of his eyes. The visitor told an utterly bewildered doctor, in uncertain terms, if he did not destroy all of the information he'd collected on the UFO case, he himself would suffer the same fate as the coin. As the man spoke these last words, Hopkins stated how his speech had begun to slow down and that his words had become slurred. The strange man suddenly told that his energy was running low and that he had to leave. The doctor showed him to the door and watched as he walked down the steps, holding onto the railing almost as if he was crippled. He then hobbled around the corner and out of sight, at which point there was a huge, bright flash and then silence. Hopkins was deeply disturbed by this experience. His family came home later that evening to find him sat in the living room staring into space, with every light in the house turned on. There have been many accounts over the last 50 or 60 regarding years men in black, and many, especially those as fantastical as the Herbert Hopkins encounter, have been met with cynicism and sometimes even outright derision from the wider community. Their existence is extremely difficult to prove, and more often than not, belief boils down to the credibility of the witness, and that is just not enough for the majority of skeptics. However, in 2012, some very interesting footage surfaced on the internet. The video was recorded 4 years earlier in 2008 and was taken from a CCTV camera situated in the lobby of a hotel near Niagara Falls, in Ontario, Canada. 2 weeks prior to its recording, one of the employees at the hotel had witnessed strange UFO activity over the Niagara River in the early hours of the morning, and this resulted in an unexpected visit from 2 strange men dressed in black. The camera captured these 2 individuals entering the hotel reception, walking in exactly the same way as each other, wearing exactly the same clothes, and even appearing to look exactly the same in both facial structure and build. Witnesses reported that they were very tall and thin, and that they looked like identical twins. Hotel guests and employees alike were profoundly disturbed by their presence, not just because of their threatening behavior, but because of their appearance in general. The descriptions given were very similar to the stranger who had visited Hopkins: tall, thin, utterly devoid of hair, and failing to exhibit any kind of emotion or facial expression. The 2 men both had identical icy blue eyes, which were described as being almost hypnotic. They never blinked once. They were said to have a determined, inquisitive nature, and once again, the people who came into contact with them reported that they felt exposed, as if their innermost thoughts were somehow being read. These strangers kept asking to speak to the young man who had witnessed the UFO activity 2 weeks earlier, but fortunately for him, he was not at work that day. When they failed in their attempts to locate him, the strange men apparently began asking staff members about other UFO sightings and conspiracy theories in general. They appeared neither satisfied nor dissatisfied with any of the answers given to them. They simply logged the information and moved on, leaving as abruptly as they had arrived, never to be seen or heard from again. This encounter is very similar in description to many other accounts recorded throughout the last 60 or 70 years, and it would seem to suggest that the men in black are not quite of this world. Other accounts, however, have been much less fanciful, with witnesses of those encounters reporting no such odd appearance or behavior from the men who visited them. So what are we to believe? Are the men in black human or non-human? Or are they a combination of the two, humans and extraterrestrials, working together towards the same goal? Do they even exist at all? There is very little evidence that would suggest so. And even the CCTV footage recorded at the hotel in Ontario is questionable. It was coincidentally released on the internet at around the same time that the Third Man in Black movie was being heavily promoted, which has led many skeptics to believe it was nothing more than a viral marketing campaign. But this doesn't explain the 2008 times, all the numerous witness accounts which back it up. In general, skeptics have pointed out that the Men in Black phenomenon is largely limited to North America, has become an ingrained facet of American folklore and is above all relatively recent. The height of its notoriety having occurred during the 1950s, at a time when paranoia over unidentified flying objects was at its peak. Finally, they argue that it all began with one man, Albert Bender, and that every other account since then is the result of copycats and opportunists wishing to further inflate the legend. However, this is not strictly accurate. Reports of men in black are not just limited to the United States. Many encounters have occurred in Europe, Australia, and elsewhere around the globe. And whilst modern descriptions of these individuals can mostly be traced back to Bender's account, the phenomenon is not all that recent and actually predates the 1950s era by hundreds of years. During the Middle Ages, people would often report encountering men dressed in black robes, wearing black hats, malevolent entities who possessed inhuman capabilities and were odd in both appearance and behavior. Descriptions of these strange men were nearly always the same, leading many to believe that they were all manifestations of just one man, and that man was the devil. So could these individuals actually be spiritual or even paranormal as opposed to supernatural? It has been suggested by some that the men in black are in fact demonic in nature, and links to shadow people have been made, particularly that of the Hat Man for obvious reasons. Relationships with the black-eyed children have also been reported, with some witnesses seeing both men in black and black-eyed children traveling around in the same vehicles. Regardless of these theories, it is largely assumed and accepted by the fringe community that MIBs are extraterrestrial visitors who have infiltrated various governments around the world, and worse that, those governments are actually aware of their presence and even work in collusion with them. To what ends is anyone's guess. Whoever the men in black are, it is clear that they are rather sinister, and that no good ever comes of their presence. Witnesses often feel intimidated, threatened, and utterly disturbed after coming into contact with them, whether they are government agents, extraterrestrial beings, paranormal entities, or nothing more than a figment of the imagination. The thought of coming face to face with one of them is no less terrifying. If you are ever lucky enough to see an unidentified flying object or witness some other supernatural event, only to hear a gentle knock at your door in the dead of night, we advise you not to answer it.